Darling down southwest. So we look after pretty much everything from where we stand today out to the border. So that's a Coolphy and Thargomindah. 10 council areas, and we're going to visit 8 of them over the next 4 days and do these presentations. Poor old Coolphy and Baloo at the very end are missing out, but we threw the other big loop and catch up with everybody else through these. So Regional Development Australia, for those of you who don't know, partly funded by the Department of Infrastructure, and under our funding, we want to try and get more grants to the region and have better quality grant applications. So obviously this is where data is very important, and why we have this great relationship with Kat from ID. We want to progress more projects, and the other thing that we do is we're meant to be across that very big footprint to feed back to the federal government what's going on. So at the peak of COVID, we were on 3 calls a week with our minister, feeding back what was going on the ground in the region. A lot of that was saw in stimulus packages and policy changes. But we're now on monthly calls. So the reason I share that is just so that you guys know that if you need any help with data, trying to get access to grants, where you're trying to progress a project, or you've got something that you want to feedback, please get back in touch with either myself or Tim, that you would probably be getting emails from. Get back in touch with myself and Tim, and we'll help you with that. So that's our role and where we fit. But today's not about IDA, it's actually about ID profiles. So ourselves, with the 10 councils across our region, co-fund this tool called ID Profile. About 90% of what Kat's going to take you through today is publicly available. Who here has had a play with ID Profile before in the past? Yeah, so a few of you. Who hasn't looked at it at all? It's going to be a nice mix. It's good to know. So really what we're going to do today is just take you through the tool, show you what's publicly available. There is a lot in there. That's the short version, but you can't break it. So you just go in there and have a look at what data you're after, depending on what you're trying to progress. Is it for a business case? Is it for a grant? And Kat's going to run you through all of that. And then if you ever get stuck, you can come back to us as well. If time permits, I think we're going to have a look at also the economic impact tools. There's a couple other tools in there. Those ones are password protected, but if you ever want something out of that, you just email Tim and he will punch out those reports. Today's more about letting you know what's in those reports. But apart from them, all the rest is publicly available. You can go search these things now, and Kat's really here traveling and doing the Darling down southwest road trip to show you guys how you navigate what's in there and where it is. But as I said, if you get stuck with something, you're like, I don't remember where she found the Indigenous data, you just get in touch with us and we can help you out. All right. So I'm going to hand over to Kat, and she's going to take you on a tour through this tool, and hopefully we won't have any others to admit in, but I'll keep an eye.
Just lock that down if messages keep popping up to me for some reason. Yeah, and I'll run through this.
Beautiful.
So the first thing I'm going to do is just run you through a presentation looking at sort of the national and state story now that we've sort of come into the aftermath of COVID happening on the ground, which is really interesting for us as an economics team, but also just for the community, and particularly I'm based in Queensland, and all of my colleagues are based in Melbourne. So it's been a very different experience for me compared to the team in Victoria as well. So Trudy, you might want to get that off the front of the screen there, darling.
Yeah, I'll minimise it down, and hopefully it'll just pop up when somebody's coming in.
So this is just.
I'm just thinking, Kat, if you don't mind doing it from this side, the sound will come through here.
Yeah, the sound will come through there. All right,
Yeah.
I'll just look at the both.
You're right? Okay, you are.
No, it's not. Just yeah, there we go. So the first thing that Trudy mentioned is you guys actually have access to an economic profile for the whole of Darling down southwest region, of which you can drill down into individual regions. So you can actually drill down into those local government areas that you might want to have a focus on, whether it's Maranoa or Toowoomba or Merway or that sort of thing. So it's really important for you guys to have an understanding that a lot of that information just cancel it down. Yeah. It's really important information. It gets updated yearly, and it gives you guys an understanding exactly where your position is at any point in time in terms of your economics In terms of your profile tool, when we look up here, we've actually got 2 tools and I'll run you through them today. The red tool, community profile, is all of your census information. So we've obviously just done the census, and in the next 6 to 12 months, we will start updating that tool to reflect how your community has changed. And it's going to be a really interesting story because there's been a lot of things happening, particularly in terms of migration patterns, you know, people's living arrangements, people moving back into their parents' homes and all different things like that. So there's going to be some really interesting stuff that comes through that community profile in what was, you know, a very challenging census because we had so many people in lockdown at that point in time. So we didn't have a lot of those people on the road. So places like Cairns, where traditionally they had a lot of tourists in the community at that particular time, you know, we're going to be seeing what happens in those communities as well.
I'm just checking our sound is okay. So I might have to
Yeah,
get you to
you're
stay near the laptop.
So the lead up to COVID, this is what was happening in the Darling Downs and Southwest region. So, and a lot of this was, you know, supported by the economic activity that was happening in Toowoomba. And we could see that from about 2015, we've had some really nice growth in this region. So we were kind of on a bit of a roll, which is really a good thing because a lot of the communities that where we saw declines happening before COVID, they've been hit extremely hard. And it's really taken a very heavy toll because their economics and their industry makeup wasn't ready for an event of this stature. So we can see there, when we look at that fall 2019 to 20, we've actually got quarterly economic indicators which will tell us that it really was COVID that created that hit. So in some communities, it wasn't COVID, it was bushfires. You know, and different events that have created that downfall. Whereas here, we know that it really was COVID. Same with in terms of our local jobs. We had jobs growth between 17 and 19, and you can see how that's just fallen away in 2020. But when we think about it, a lot of that has been upheld. And the reason why our GRP didn't fall as hard was simply because we had such generous government incentives and government programs to support jobs in the region. And these are our mixed results across our industry. So we can actually go into the program, you can see where you've had growth over the last 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, to be able to start to have a think about, well, how have your industries changed in this region? And it's particularly important to look at that in areas like Toowoomba, where you've had growth in your healthcare sector, your service sector, you've become a service hub in this community. As well. So we can see here mixed results, strong growth across ag, and ag communities during COVID have actually performed very well. So they've been very lucky. And if you've got say for example, a Cairns, which I would travel to quite a bit and talk to the Cairns regional businesses, you can actually see how the surrounding communities have really helped to ensure that the Cairns economy didn't completely fall over with their loss of international tourism. So you can see here ag, construction and healthcare and social assistance with the growth in hospitals and functions out of that as well. This is not working. So we can see we've had positive GRP growth since 2012 in this region. We've also had our unemployment rate below the regional Queensland level. Our fallout after COVID was not as strong as the rest of Queensland. So when you look at this region in particular, it did not fall as hard simply because of your industry makeup and that, I guess, reliance on the service sector and also your public service sector. So the public service sector has played a really important role because those jobs are much more secure than, for example, in a tourist or accommodation and food services type industries. And building approvals, strong building approvals year on year since 2012, which has really helped you guys out. So the economic fallout, gross regional product in that June quarter fell by 396 million in the Darling Downs region. So it was a huge impact. And really at that point in time, we weren't sure how places were going to rebound from that type of loss of activity. Local jobs fell by 5,593, which majority of were kept alive through JobKeeper scheme. And I can show you today where you can look at job seeker information, which is across the table payments. And you can actually see how you're performing in that respect. Job seeker recipients between March and June increased by 6,121. So that is people accessing youth allowance or job seeker. So this is nothing to do with JobKeeper. This is people going and getting your old unemployment benefit, which is quite scary. So when we look at that 6,121 through that quarter, and we can actually measure monthly how we're tracking as a community in that field. The tourism economy was hit hard in Queensland, and we can see there straight away anywhere that has the very, very dark red, we're down by greater than 5% in employment. So you can see straight away Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, up where I am in the Livingston Shire, Cairns, Townsville, any of those tourist destinations were hit very hard, and border locations, because we can see what's happening down south at the moment, and all of the you know, the what do they call, strikes and things like this on the border, and what's happening around Coolangatta. It has made a big difference in those economies, and they've really struggled with that. They've spent a lot of time on how do they solve the border issue, as opposed to looking at how do we increase domestic tourism, which is what the Sunshine Coast, places like Scenic Room, even Toowoomba, have prepared for very well. And that's going to be really important moving forward around that domestic tourism market. It was because this presentation was used for Fraser Coast. Okay. So we were just looking at, we were zoning in on Fraser Coast at that time. They've got a jobs committee there, and we just finished doing a whole bunch of work for them around the impact of COVID on youth unemployment in their region, simply because youth unemployment has played, is playing out a big role, and trying to get those people now back engaged in the workforce. It's very difficult. It's a very, very difficult measure. But Queensland has benefited from the exodus from Sydney and Melbourne in late 2020, and we hear lots of people on the ground talking about this migration of Victorians and Sydney-siders coming into the community. Yes, that is true. Yes, we are seeing certainly an influx of these people into regional Queensland. Majority of people are moving into regional Queensland, but Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast form part of regional Queensland, so that has been a major, an area where they sort of flock to. So we can see that happening. One thing we are seeing is that the churn effect that we normally see in Queensland is not occurring. So when you actually look at your numbers, your net migration is actually only slightly up. The difference is we're not seeing people move out of our regions, which means that we don't create the churn effect in our housing market, which then puts pressure on things like renting, our housing market in general. So in an area where I live in central Queensland, I live in Yeppoon, which is half an hour from Rocky, and we are having major problems with housing shortage at the moment. The construction industry is booming, and it's a very, very difficult period for people who were renting, who now we have people moving out of Brisbane back to their hometowns, back into accommodation, and displacing our people that may have been renting long-term in the community. So it's creating certainly some major difficulties. But this is true. This is happening. We are seeing increased numbers back to the old days when, if you remember, sort of 2008, 2009, 2010, we were seeing lots of people move into southeast Queensland. It was a really important part of Queensland's growth as a state, whereas now we're starting to see that happen again. Prior to COVID, we were second in terms of domestic migration. Majority of the domestic migration was into Victoria during that period, so we came second, whereas now we're obviously back first, and we're taking most of the domestic migration. Housing market has been strengthening. House prices are on the rise, which is great for some people. We're also seeing these massive rental shortages, some really critical challenges around attracting workforce to our communities, in particular industries. So we see lots of shortages in industries like construction, particularly food and accommodation services. In Douglas, I was just recently in Douglas, and it's such an interesting story because this is an economy that was decimated after the GFC, and they just started to rebuild. And they got to COVID, and of course, international tourism fell away, where they get, a third to a half of their visitation. But you now walk down the streets in Douglas, the problem is they can't get people to work in their restaurants. The place is capped. You have to book 2 weeks in advance, but at the end of the day, they can't get the workforce, and there's nowhere to house them. So it's a really, really different, very, very interesting time. I have no idea how to stop that happening. So it is a very challenging time for these regional areas, particularly when they're certainly not used to
this level of activity coming into the community. There's also the threat of COVID coming into the community as well. And then when borders shut down, what that means for bookings and the insecurity of that sort of thing as well. So here we can see this was Australia's economic recovery, and it certainly is well underway. We certainly saw in 2020, that's the hardest fall we've ever seen in our history. So it's really, you know, well worse than the oil price shocks in the 1970s and you know, the recession in the 1990s. This was unprecedented. This was something we've never seen before. But given the response from the government, we certainly, you know, came out of it very, very well. And we came out of it very quickly. There was no one that predicted that we would come out of it as quickly as what we did. Which is great news. And Queensland is certainly leading that recovery. We can see the December quarter for Victoria and New South Wales was strong simply because they were coming off such a very low base, whereas we can see Queensland has been consistently strong through this crisis and has fared very, very well. As I say, 52 billion provided in the June quarter, including that JobKeeper payment, the home builder scheme, which has helped to invigorate the construction sector, which now we're starting to see some challenges come out of that, where we're seeing building material shortages, hold-ups on houses, all of these different things. So it's it's a very, very interesting time, and it's a really interesting time for all these regional communities who just aren't prepared for this sort of thing. You know, I live in Yeppoon and people are sort of going, what do we do now? You know, we've got the councils coming to people like us and saying, well, what do we do? How do we actually manage this crisis? Because yes, there is some economics involved, but it really is almost like a social or community crisis in terms of housing and things like that. So it's a really, really difficult period. Labour force conditions continue to surprise us. So as I mentioned before, with regards to Australia's recovery, you know, our labour force conditions and the way, you know, I saw the unemployment rate today was down at 4.8% or 4.9%. Now, this is during a period where which I would question that figure, but at the same time, you sit and look and go, there's two communities almost completely, two of our biggest communities in complete lockdown at the moment. So it's a really interesting period for us. Our jobs and skills base is changing, our demand for skills. So it is something that the councils need to be certainly across and our local business as well. We have had strong growth in new business investment, which this was something we were really worried about. Normally when you're in a recession, you'll tend to find that business investment from our local businesses, even from our bigger businesses, from our government, really falls and really drops away. And we started to see it fall very sharply. And whilst we're nowhere near where we were, say, for example, right at the beginning of the graph in March 2015, we can see that we have started to rebound, which is good. And what that basically tells us is there is some confidence in the market. Okay, and when you actually look at business investment in Queensland, it's actually much stronger than all other states, and that's simply through confidence in our market. We have been very much shielded from this crisis. I mean, I think I wear a mask when I go to the airport, that is it. You know, I'd fly back into Rocky and you wouldn't know that there was a health pandemic going on. So it really is an interesting time for our state compared to the others. Household spending and export is certainly behind the rebound, and I talk about it later, but certainly tourism, this is our accelerating. So tourism is something that we need to really look at and really think about in Queensland, because it is something that's going to continue to keep us rolling. But beyond 2022, this is something that's going to really start to affect us in the long term. So whilst in the short term, we feel okay here, at the end of the day, what has fueled Australia's economic growth has been our migration, international migration programs. And that has basically stopped. So we can see here 1.9 million less people by 2041. Our eastern seaboard will be the most impacted. Now, a lot of businesses who are, you know, modelling their economic behaviour and outcomes over a 10 and 20-year period are now factoring this sort of thing into their, you know, into their work. So you can see lower demand for goods and services, much fewer students and skilled migrants coming into our communities. Okay, so we will start to feel the ramifications of that. Queensland at the moment is not, because we are still creating that or you know, taking on that shortfall through domestic migration. But it's certainly something that we need to look at. You can see in Queensland, 425,000 less people by 2041. So it's thinking about what that can mean for our demand for goods and services. We will continue to benefit if Victoria does not bounce back quickly. So what we've tended to find, and you can actually measure some of these activities, is that when Victoria has an economic downturn, our migration goes through the roof from that region. So it's really interesting the way that works. So we see that, you know, this migration, this exodus from Victoria, the longer COVID happens and continues to create lockdowns down there, we're going to see more Victorian number plates coming into Queensland as people start to accelerate that transition into Queensland, because we do see a lot of Victorians moving into Queensland, particularly our coastal areas. Anyway, where's my little mouse? This is going to be really interesting for communities. So we've done a lot of work from home, particularly with councils like Scenic Rim, who work on the border of Brisbane and the Gold Coast, and they have a lot of people going into those areas each day for work, and what that means for them in terms of stimulating economic activity in their local government area, as well as that is getting people off their roads. So it is important. It will happen. 3/4 of some industries' work could be done remotely. And what we're seeing, even with things like our service sector and, you know, people that work, you know, as lawyers and solicitors, accountants, things like that in the city, are now spending 2 to 3 days working from home. What does that mean for Brisbane CBD? Okay, so it is really interesting. And I was just in Brisbane the other day, and it is dead. And it's really, really interesting to see what that could mean for the reinvigoration of that place. So we need to respond to market changes really quickly. That's really, really going to be very, very important moving forward. We have seen some councils do it very, very well. Scenic Rim and Sunshine Coast are the two front runners in terms of what we have seen and what we have worked with in terms of being able to respond quickly to the changes that are going up and create projects and products and businesses very quickly to respond to these changes and to get their business community thinking about what these challenges and what these opportunities are going to be now moving forward because of COVID. So businesses need to become leaner and more agile. We need to think about what this means in terms of our demand for skills and reskilling, need for retraining, thinking about how we attract skills to our region and what is, you know, what is the basis for people moving at the moment? What is the, you know, what is the likelihood of people moving to our region? If you live in a lifestyle region or you live in a, you know, more affordable region, this is the time that people are looking to move. So it's thinking about how you can play into that as well. Trend towards online shopping has just gone through the roof. So thinking about warehousing, you know, some communities have set this up really well in terms of their transport, warehousing, how they're getting goods and services around. 9 million Aussie households shopped online in 2020. It's gone through the roof. We do a lot of work with Australia Post simply because it's a good indicator of what's happening in the communities. And we know Australia Post has had a lot of pressure in terms of responding to the demand for goods and services, capturing a share of this domestic tourism economy. So whilst we have seen an increase in household spending on things like renovations, construction activity, pools, all of those things as people forfeited their holidays and decided to work on their homes or whatever it might be, we're starting to see that flip as people are going, well, let's take a domestic holiday. But the one thing we know is that Australians spend more overseas than overseas visitors spend here. So there's a lot of money to burn, and we see a lot of money in people's pockets, particularly in Cairns and places like that now, where you're seeing a lot more Mercedes being hired and different things like that. So it's a real transition in the type of tourist that's coming to these locations as well. So it's thinking about how you play into that market and how you try and create that repeat visitor. So economic conditions improving prior to COVID. So there's certainly some, you know, great takeaways from the work that was done prior to COVID arriving. There is a very challenging outlook in terms of managing the workforce. I've done some work with a couple of agencies in Toowoomba around the attraction of workers and what the economic loss is through our economic modelling, what the economic loss is of not getting those positions filled quickly and in a timely fashion. And there's big economic losses that are created out of those sorts of things. So it's ensuring that we are, talking to our education providers and thinking about, well, what is the next level of skills that we need. Availability of housing stock is going to be a massive problem for regional Queensland. Online shopping, policy cost pressures on the manufacturing sector. There's supply chain issues going on all around the country, in particular industries, getting goods and services out of China and places like that to be able to fulfil what is our lack of manufacturing in this country. And that has certainly been a major problem. Moving from recovery, confidence is high. Sorry, that's from another one. FNQ, well, those businesses have been extremely resilient. We've got industry recovery, lifestyle locations, working from anywhere, domestic tourism, population outflow from Victoria, really looking at things like smart hubs in communities, co-working spaces, things like that, where people can work from any environment in any location is going to be clearly very important. My job, I work from home. My head office is in Victoria. I'm supposed to go there once a month for 4 days. I haven't been there a year and a half. So it's that ability to be able to create processes in businesses that you can do that effectively. You can participate in online, catch-ups and conferences and things like that to be able to facilitate your learning and continual development with your company. And then using data to inform your decisions. So data at the moment is really difficult because things are changing so quickly. So anything where we're looking at, our economic outlooks or things like that, it is challenging because each day is, you go into a 2-week lockdown, another 2-week lockdown. I was flying to Darwin on last Monday and got caught in Darwin, because they went into a lockdown, and then, so then you've got to figure out how you deal with all of these things. In the Northern Territory, the airport's full and everyone's flying back out again. So you've got 500-600 people that were coming into Darwin to stay, have all had to leave the community, so it's a huge economic loss for these places. It's calling up accommodation providers at the last minute. All of those things have a huge impact on businesses. So in terms of looking forward, it's very difficult. What we can do is we can use data that we have, that we know is actually part of, and I'll put you guys onto that you can actually get data in a timely fashion whilst it's backdated to the national and state accounts. It gives you a good indication of what could be happening moving forward. And this tool enables you guys to go home and be able to have a play and have a look at what's happening in your community and some of the data that's around at the moment. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to take you first to the community profile. And basically this just gives us an overview of your community. So it talks about your population, your land area, your population density. You've got all of your council areas that Trudy covers. So all of those areas are part of that Darling Downs and Southwest region. When you come down to the bottom, guys, you can see this menu. So if you're ever looking for data, like say, for example, if you wanted to have a look at overseas arrivals or household income or number of cars per household or things like that, if you come down to the menu, you can actually just capture it all there and go through and have a look at different details. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the stats so you can see how we read it. Okay, the first one I'm going to go to is your population highlights. And this is set, you can see here, it's set on the RDA Darling Downs and Southwest region. So all of the data I'm looking at the moment is for Darling Downs and Southwest, but you can actually drill down. So if you just want to look at Toowoomba, we can come down here and say Toowoomba Regional Council area, and we can see steady population growth. Our ERP is about 170,000. We can see it's grown from 1,364 from the previous year. So we've had some nice growth between 19 and 20. And then we start to get these little tiles. So it talks to us about our median age, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So if you guys are filling out a grant application and you need to be able to say, well, this is our, number of Indigenous people that live in our community.
this is how many couples of children we have, we've got this much high density, or whatever it might be, depending on what your grant application is for, you can actually come into here and you can find out some of those details. So your median weekly household income, you know, it's higher than the RDA Darling Downs and Southwest region, but it's lower than regional Queensland and lower than Queensland. So you can start to make those comparisons, because when you're filling out a grant application, you're actually filling it out as a story, and you're trying to tell a story of why you should be getting this money. So you're able to come through here, overseas born 12%, a little bit higher than RDA DDSW, but lower than regional Queensland, lower than Queensland. University quals aren't too bad compared to regional Queensland. That's because you've got a university compared to other regional areas. We can see here unemployment 6.7%, trade quals 22%, public transport 1% compared to Queensland at 7%. And here's your CFA index, which if you filled out grant applications before, you'll often get asked for that index of disadvantage, and that just rates your community against other communities in Australia. So it's almost like a weighting, and it will depend on things like how educated is your community, how many cars per household, what is your median weekly household income, things like that. And I think the top of the list is actually Weipa in Queensland, which if you've ever been to Weipa, and I've been there a couple of times, it's not the nicest place to go in the world. It certainly doesn't have a shopping centre, or but it has a lot of wealth in that community because it's owned by the mine. So it's thinking about those sorts of things. So you can get that for any of those regions. And guys, what you can do is you can actually export that into a PDF. So if you want it just sitting there, you can actually just export that into a PDF and print it out. So when I go and visit the councillors from Toowoomba, we'll take them a printout of that sort of thing. Now that's all of that information is from 2016, except for your ERP, except for your estimated resident population. It's all from 2016. That will be one of the first things that will be updated. Okay, so it's normally June, July, something like that. It normally starts to get updated, the census. Some of the other things, how old are we? Let's have a look at Toowoomba. And now what it does is this is going to tell us, derived from the census question, what is the person's date of birth or age, referring to the total population. When we move down here, we always get these data tables. You can change. So I am on Toowoomba. Here I've got my benchmark area as RDA Darling Downs. I can change that to Queensland or Australia depending on my grant application. So if my grant is with the state government, I want to show my comparison with Queensland. Okay, so you basically go on here and you can see you get your data, you get your actual numbers, and then when we come down here, we get our charts. And this is where the rubber hits the road. So you can actually start to see exactly what's happening in Toowoomba compared to the rest of Queensland. And the first thing you'll look at here is you'll say the dominance in our community in terms of our age structure is around here. Okay, so we can see there's lots of young people, lots of families in the community. Where we dig out is in the working population, and that's to do with jobs. Okay, so we can see here, we've got this strength in here, and we can also see compared to Queensland, we've actually got this high percentage of oldies in our community as well, which tells me straight away that you've got a decent healthcare sector, because if they can stay to that point, often you'll see in other regional communities it really starts to dip away because they just don't have the services. What we do want to also look at is, well, how did it change between 2011 and 2016? And this is interesting because when a council, so when I talked to Toowoomba Council, whilst on the previous chart, we could see that the dominance was in the younger side of Toowoomba's population, here, where we're changing most is in our elderly population. So when we think about service delivery and what we provide as a community around even things like housing, we can't just provide 4-bedroom homes, because we are also attracting retirees to our community, retirees and an ageing population. And we can actually look at where those people come from as well. So this is a good one for the council. Spends a lot of time looking at the age profiles and age demographics, because it has a huge implication for what they provide in terms of their housing. So when we come into how do we live and we look at our household summary, so this is what is the person's relationship to each other in the household. We've got
and I'm going to come straight down to the charts because you can see it better. We can see here couples without children and couples with children are our most dominant. So couples with children, but that's compared to Queensland, it's a little bit lower. Here we can see it's higher in terms of couples without children. We've got this bit of lone person out there, which is something that I know Toowoomba has spent a lot of time on figuring out who is that lone person that lives in our community, because when I think about a lone person, my mum's a widow, so I think about an elderly person who, has lost their partner or whatever it might be. That lone person has changed. So we're talking FIFO workers, we're talking people who choose to live alone, that sort of thing. So when we move down here, we can see our greatest increase between that census period is couples without children and lone person households. So if I was looking at just what is the dominant age group in Toowoomba's community, I would be saying, well, it's young people, it's families, that's what it is. But in actual fact, when you sit down and break down the data, you're looking at it and you're saying, well, they can't just provide 4-bedroom homes in this community because we are seeing growth in lone persons. Okay, and we need to think about that category in terms of safety, security, transport, ensuring good internet connectivity, phone connectivity, all different things like that. What types and styles of housing do we put in place? What is our position on providing healthcare services in home, all of that sort of thing, ensuring that those hospital services and things like that are all brought together to ensure we're looking after those lone person households. So these are all the different things you guys can look at. So dwelling type, so you can have a look at, well, what type of dwelling do we actually provide in this community? All of those sorts of things. The other thing I wanted to show you on here is your job seeker information. So before I talked to you about 6,151, I think it was, additional job seeker participants in the RDA region from that March to June. So in that really heavy period where it was like, okay, what's going to happen here? We've got an extra 6,000 people on job seeker. That figure has now reduced to 1,477 additional people since COVID. Okay, so month by month, councils will often look at this information to say, how are we tracking in terms of our job seeker recipients? And the beauty of this data, and the reason I love it, is it's not a prediction, it is across the counter. So it is people accessing those benefits across the counter. I think you can work up to 10 hours, which is why there's a discrepancy between what they call labour force survey unemployment and this unemployment, is because you can work a small period of time and still receive some form of benefit. So we can see there that has reduced, out of sight, but it's ensuring that we're tracking in the right direction. And you can see that cut for every council and what percentage. So the highest percentage I was looking the other day was Quilpie, followed by Paru, followed by Southern Downs, and so on and so on. So it's a good one to look at, and you can see here some charts as well around what was happening in March compared to now what's happening in those communities around job seeker payments.
So we have 10 councils across Darling Downs Southwest. And for those of you who may notice, there's only 9 listed there. It's because the only local government in all of Australia with 0 people on job seeker is Balloon in the most southwest corner of Queensland. So I had another RDA ring me one day going, I had to look up where the hell Baloo was because they're the only council that has nobody on job seeker. And obviously they still do have no one on job seeker because they're not even listed in the ID data. Yeah, so
yeah.
Just a little aside.
Yeah, so this is a really good one to track. So if you're into data and you're into looking at how your community is performing, this is a really good one to track as well. So another thing you can do, guys, is you can actually get reports. So when you come in here, you can get reports for any of these areas. So all of that data that's in there, you can actually come onto here and click on, I want to look at volunteering, incomes, ethnicity, population summaries, and then you can come down to the bottom and you can put in your email address and send yourself the report in PDF or Word. And the good thing, I would send it in Word and take out most of the data tables, because what you really want to look at is the story and the charts, and you can actually just copy and paste those things and then put them into your grant application work. So you can say, okay, well, if I want to convince someone that we need, you know, additional support for primary schools or whatever it might be, it's being able to showcase that, well, we have a real dominance in that age group compared to the rest of Queensland. That's why it's more important to Toowoomba to get that than it is for other areas. So thinking about those sorts
Now
of
that
things.
downwards report is one of my favourite, because what you can do, I know Kat just then clicked whole sections, like all the income. But if you know you're applying for a grant and it's about the fact that migrants who are moving to the region need something additional to, you know, be able to get, you know, households, then you only click on those things and then you have a report that only sums up the data that you need to prove what you're trying to prove for your grant or for your business case. So the beauty of that one is you can just click on some of the drop down boxes. So, you know, under ethnicity, you can just click on birthplace. But that's if birthplace is relevant to what argument you're trying to put together. Okay, but even when Kat showed you before any of the other tables or the graphs, you are not breaching any plagiarism rules or anything. We fund it, so you can click on the export button and copy and paste that into a PowerPoint like Kat showed to start with. You know, 90% of that PowerPoint was just exported data and graphs and things out of this tool.
Yeah.
Same with you guys, if you want to use it that way. I see people in the media use it really well for media releases or for their presentations. Like some of our mayors use it really well for their presentations. You just hit those export buttons and then you can use it however you want. Okay?
Yeah. And guys, and just remember that, as Trudy mentioned at the start, if you are going for a grant and you're confused about what data to use, you can contact RDA and they will get in contact with myself and say, Kat, these guys are looking to fund a, you know, new facility at the showgrounds, and, you know, they want some data around, you know, a certain age demographic or whatever it might be. Because if there's you know, pieces of data that you can't find on there, we will find that for you. So we will get that for you. Okay, so it's important just to understand that we're a resource that you guys can use to be able to support your grant applications. I'm just going to quickly run you through this one because I can see we're running out of time. And this has over 1,100 pieces of data in the economic profile. Okay, and where we get this data from is from our national and state accounts that get pulled together it's normally every December. We also get it from our labour force survey, household expenditure survey. All of your tax information comes into play when we look at this data, and we break it down by local government area all over Australia. I think we have 320 local governments that subscribe to this tool and work with us around their economic data. So each year what happens is in about March, we provide these data sets to all of those council areas. And what it does is it allows you to be able to reflect on the previous June to June. Okay, so that this data is out to June 2020. So this only takes into consideration that 1 quarter of COVID. So everyone is very, very patient in waiting for that next data rollout to come, but we need to wait for the national and state accounts to reconcile those before we can release the next financial year's data set.
But certainly the green tab is a lot more up to date than the red tab.
Yes.
However, when you put these in any of your grant applications, both the federal and the state government know this is the best up-to-date data you can possibly get your hands on at the moment.
Exactly. So here we can look at the economic data, and this is where I pulled the graph from before. So I just copy and paste that across to a presentation. It's that simple. What you guys might want to do is change and have a look at Toowoomba Regional Council area. So we can see how strong the Toowoomba economy was from 2015. And we've been providing economic reports to Toowoomba since about that period because of the really strong growth. And that's growth through building approvals, it's growth through change in industry sectors, it's the expansion of the shopping centre, it's the additional the range crossing, things like that. So there's been a whole multitude of things that have just happened to come together over the last 5 years that have supported growth in this community. But we can see how hard COVID hit Toowoomba during that period. And when we look here, we can compare that to Queensland. So we can see Toowoomba compared to Queensland. When we come down here, we can also get actual numbers. So we can see positive growth 2016, 17, 18, 19, and then we had this fall away in 2020. What we can also do is come to these quarterly economic indicators. And I don't want to confuse you by going all over the place, but we can see how from June 2019, we actually had a series of events that have supported that shock to the local economy, but it's been the COVID quarter that has been the greatest hit. Okay, so there were impacts of droughts, bushfires, things like this that happened in the January of that year that also had an impact. But we can see how that we've had quarter on quarter for the last 5 quarters of negative growth. And we can see there, but that's your COVID quarter, so 126 million. And we can see here though, compared to Queensland, Toowoomba hasn't done too bad. So it's interesting when you start to look at it and start to compare across jurisdictions, and you can see that, well, in terms of Toowoomba versus Queensland, you can see how hard some of the other areas in Queensland have been hit, particularly those coastal regions and those border locations. So that's just in terms of our gross regional product. While we're here, I'll just look at those local jobs as well. So this is your quarterly indicators. So you can see whilst GRP was falling, we actually maintained quite well local jobs, but then we've got this COVID quarter. So a loss of 3,201 jobs just in that quarter. So almost, it's about half of the jobs that were looking for job seeker were Toowoomba. But certainly not as hard hit as Queensland. So really interesting once you start digging down into the data. So that's our quarterly indicators. So I look here at my economic indicators, the other one. So I've looked at gross product. The next one I look at is local employment. Okay, so here's our fall away. Once again, you can export this into PNG, PDF, CSV files to put straight into presentations and that sort of thing. And you get
always that export button at the very top.
Always, yeah.
On every page, just more of everything that's on that page.
Yeah.
There's one at the top, and you just can export it or as a bigger report.
Yeah, or you can even share it. So you can share it to Facebook, or give it to people as well, like that, because it's depending on if you're into data, I guess. I am, so I sort of flick stuff around. Building approvals. So when we look at, this is 2021. So this is up to, okay, so this is year ending June. So this has just been updated. So you can see there what's happening in terms of building approvals moving forward. And one of the things I always look at, and our team will always look at in terms of growth, is your building approvals, because it really gives you a good indicator of where you could be moving forward and how your GRP and jobs is going to perform. So we can see here that year ending, this has been a big year for building approvals through council. So you can start to see, and I mean, you can see that activity on the ground. All of majority of regional Queensland looks like that at the moment. And we can see residential, it's mostly residential. So let's move back up here. I just want to have a look at that. So yeah, mostly residential, little bit of non-res in there as well. Whereas previously, this year was mainly non-res compared to residential. This is all residential building approvals. Wow, okay.
This is handy for our builders in the room, this sort of stuff you might want to share and using your marketing or a presentation or something like that.
Are there building people in the room? Yeah. You've found that there's construction activity strong? Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. Yeah, we've got builders in Yeppoon who it's a 12-month wait now, to build a house. So yeah, really interesting. The other thing I like to look at is my value added, and this just brings us down into specific industries. Okay, so what it means is I'm looking at, I can drill down into things like accommodation and food services. I can drill down into transport, postal, warehousing, and I can look at specific subsectors and see how they've performed over time. What I normally do is when we get our new data, I'll come in here and I want to look at, and the reason why I've chosen value add is because it talks to me about profitability. So output brings into consideration all of the things that you put into your business. So say, for example, if you buy a coffee machine and if you've got a cafe and you've renovated, it takes into consideration all of that money you've spent. Whereas value add just looks at, well, what's my cream on top once all of those payments have sort of gone out. That's probably the easiest way to explain it. So this really talks to me about how profitable my industries are. So what I normally do is I'll come and visit the council as soon as the new data gets released, and I'll talk to them about what's happened in each of their businesses over the previous year. Okay, and we can see here from that 1819 to 1920 period, the fall in agricultural value add during that period up to June 2020. And that's coming off the drought. So if you look at any agricultural community up to June 2020, hasn't performed very well. What we're finding though in the data sets that we get through at the moment is agriculture is on the rebound. Okay, and it's really been performing quite well. We can also see mining had a fall rate. Mining is another one that since June has performed very well, particularly around jobs. I know there's massive job shortages in Central Queensland, North Queensland around the mines at the moment, searching for people to fill positions. Manufacturing had a fall away. So you can see all of these areas, accommodation and food services. Now that is mainly driven, as is retail trade. That's your COVID quarter coming into play there, and those lockdowns that happened in Queensland. We can see here finance and insurance is up, I think. So over that previous year, we had some real problems in Toowoomba. I remember talking to Seamus at the time around what we were going to do about some of these, how we could support some of these sectors and what the council could do because they had such a big fall away in their industries. Now, some of those we can look at straight away have been driven by COVID. And we've certainly seen a turnaround now in things like construction. We've certainly seen a turnaround in mining and agriculture as well. But certainly there was some worry at that period. Here we've got some analysis down the bottom, guys, where we've got this dominant and emerging groups. And if you've got, if you're going for a grant application or things like that, you can use, as Trudy said, you can use any of this information. There's no copyright or, breaches or anything like that as part of using this particular tool. So that's your value add. So I like to look at that one when it comes out, because I do think it just gives me an idea of how profitable our industries are in our community. And you can also do that by employment. So you can go right down into those subsectors if you need to. So here we're looking, our comparison year is 18-19. So just what has happened over that 1 year financial year period, and we can see the job losses in accommodation and food services, 1,059. So that's really that COVID quarter driving that. Now, you guys probably don't have to go to this level of detail. I'm just showing you so you know that it's there. And so if you're ever thinking, I'd love to know what the job losses might be or the job gains will be, or have we rebounded in that particular quarter or that sort of thing, that information you can find. And if you ever get lost along the way, you can contact Trudy. And we can make sure that you have the right information for your application.
The quickest way to get some info like this, or even if you get a chance to quickly look through the economic impact tools, is get it to Tim.
Yeah.
He loves listening to the recording and hearing me say that. But get it to Tim, so that admin at rda-ddsw.org.au, which you should all have now because you're all registered for it. Tim, just so you know, doesn't work Fridays, but he's a lot faster at always getting back to people because sometimes I can be anywhere between here and Toowoomba.
I am going to go down to the economic impact model just now because I know that this is, important and certainly, what is it? DDSW, there it is. DDSW. We'll see if this works. It never sort of, here we go, that works. Look at that.
So everything you've seen so far, publicly available. Available, anyone can access it. When we do presentations to the councillors, it's a bit of an eye-opener for them to actually realise that actually is all publicly available. Their ratepayers can learn that stuff about their region. This tool here, that stuff under the economic tools, this is the only thing that's password protected. And it's mainly because you need some training to use it. It's not because we're trying to hide anything. Just we have had people do a report and actually attach the wrong report to a grant application that can hurt their grant. So, but this is the one, like, and the reason we like to quickly show it to you is it gives you an idea of what information you need to give Tim for Tim to do this report for you, and he will punch them out really fast.
Yeah. And it's so simple to use, but it's more the reading of it that's the hard bit, essentially, because when you look up here, what we're doing is, we just did a project not long ago for a council area. I actually think it was Boulogne, maybe it was a couple of years ago, for their BBRF funding. So the council will contact me and say, Kat, we've got this project, it's a construction project, and then it'll have an ongoing phase. So when you have a grant application, you'll often have what is the construction phase impact and what is your operational phase impact. So what we'll do here is we're saying Boulogne Shire will come in here and we find construction, and it's building construction project. This is a community centre. It was $3.1 million. So we just put in, so you can choose here sales or jobs. More often than not, in the construction phase, we're talking in sales. Okay, we don't get a quote for a house with its 10 builders, because I'd probably go, so what does that mean to my bank account? But here we're going sales, 3.1 million, and then you just put your scenario, which would be, it was a community centre that they were building. Okay, so then we hit submit. So this is in St George. It's a building construction project, and here we run through all of our outcomes. Now, not all of this information is required for your grant application. So as we built this model based on as grants became available, and we thought, well, we better add that, we better tell them what the multiplier is, we better do those things. And now it's kind of got to a point where there's a fair bit of information in there, and it can be quite confusing to understand what means what. Okay, the columns that I look at are my output column and my local jobs column. This is about how much output is this adding to our community, and this is about how many jobs is this project creating for that construction period. Here we can see our starting position of Boulogne Shire. So this is just where we're starting in Boulogne Shire. So at the moment, they've got a $10.7 million construction sector. Okay, of all of their industries together are 577 million. So that really, in terms of your grant application, you don't really need it. Okay, then we start here, impacts on Boulogne Shire economy. Our direct impact, 3.1 million, is the value of the project. Okay, that's a no-brainer. Then we come in here and we say our industrial impact is 1.28 million. And that's as we start to buy goods that go into the project. So we might need bricks and mortar and cement and whatever else. So that's our flow on into the in terms of our industrial impact. Then we've got our consumption impact, which is all of those people who are working on that project, spending money in that community. Okay. So then we say our total impact on the Boulogne Shire economy is 4.71 million. How we come to that figure is through these multipliers, but you really don't need to know what they are. Okay, so for most grant applications, at one stage they were asking for what is the multiplier. Okay, and the multiplier is the way that the money moves through the economy and at what pace and rate. Okay, and the reason why that's important is because we have a different multiplier for every LGA in Australia. Okay, most other companies will have an LGA, a multiplier based on a state. Okay, but the way that it should be broken down is by LGA, because a construction worker in Townsville is earning and spending their money differently to a construction worker in St George or Cairns or Brisbane or whatever it might be. So it's about how the money moves through the economy and how quickly. So we can see here the impact on the Queensland economy. So if you are going for a grant with the state government, you will really want to know what this is. The impact on the Queensland economy, total impact outside of Boulogne, 0.28, $4.99 million worth of economic impact on the Queensland economy. So we start with 3.1. For Queensland, we end at 4.99. for Australia, we end at 5.81 as the money dissipates outside of the region. Okay, that might be because, say, for example, you're using an architect in Sydney, or you know, you're getting goods from Perth, or whatever it might be. Those impacts will go outside of the region. So that's how you read it. In terms of your local jobs, same thing. So you can see here, direct impact is 6 jobs in the construction sector. Industrial impact 4, 11 jobs in total. Okay, then we move down here, 12 jobs in Queensland. Where this differs, so it won't differ for a place like Boulogne, but say, for example, if we were talking about a Moreton Bay or Redlands or somewhere like that, you may have local jobs 15, but of them only 6 live in Redlandshire. Okay, because you've got that journey to work data that tells us that, you know, 50% of the construction workforce actually comes from outside of the region. So you can start to break it down like that, whereas in a place like Boulogne, the majority of those people are going to be localised. Okay, so that's how you read it. So it's about looking at that output column and looking at that local jobs. Now, I get emails all the time from people saying, Kat, I've just done this, and they've exported this into an Excel file, and they'll send it to me and say, Kat, what does all this mean? That's fine. You can do that as well, okay, to myself or to Tim, and say, Kat, what does that mean in terms of I need to tell them what the direct and indirect jobs are? Because sometimes it's not going to use the same terminology as we use. So the direct impact on the construction sector would be, in terms of local jobs, would be 6. The indirect would be the industrial and the consumption impact added together, which would be 5. Okay, so it's, that terminology is where it gets a bit tricky. So that's why we're here, to be able to say, if you need help with your application, we can help you with your application. But that's where it starts to get a wee bit tricky.
We always we'll send to say like 30 Better Regions Fund, the biggest grant that opens all year. We usually send people the whole 6-page report, but what we really encourage them to do is not just slap that on as an attachment. What you need to do is, in the body of your grant, it should be scattered with numbers. Like if it's all just words, you're probably not on the right track. It should be scattered with numbers, and where you source those numbers are these reports. So, and all that stuff that's publicly available as well. So that's why you're really clear on what are you trying, what's your argument, what are you trying to say. And then some grants, especially some that were opened just recently, no additional attachments were allowed. So you actually couldn't attach the report, but you can still put that all in the body when you're addressing, say, the criteria that they want you to address. That's where you use the numbers. But as Kat said, if you need help understanding the numbers, you come back to us, we can help you with that. Like, no problems at all. And certainly if you want the full report, we can get the reports as well. So you just come back to us and we'll give you as much help as we can.
Yeah.
And so that you put in, like, at the end of the day for us, we want to win more grants, because that straight away is an economic stimulus for our region, because we'll have more of that grant bucket coming to us.
And it's government money.
And we want more of the Queensland money coming to just down southwest, and we want more of the federal money coming to just down southwest. So this is your tool to use to help you out with that.
And you can actually see, guys, through here, this is all of the information that you need. So it talks to you about the definition. It talks to you about your impact on your value add, impact on GRP, employment by industry sectors. What sectors are those jobs created in? So it's not just going to be in construction. You're also going to create jobs in things like, you know, here, professional scientific tech services, administration, things like that. So you can come down here and take out as much of this information as you need and require for that grant application. And as I say, if you get confused and you're saying, well, I don't understand what this means, then you can just contact us and we can help you with that. The other thing we can help you with is the last grant application that we had asked for detail around how many Indigenous jobs or youth jobs is this going to create. So that's where you're going to get in contact with Trudy straight away and say, Trudy, I need to know what the impact is going to be on Indigenous and youth unemployment, and we can get those numbers for you. Okay, we've stopped adding to the model because it's just creates havoc. So if there are things like that, we're able to help you and provide you with those numbers based on things like past, the history of, people being employed in those industries that categorise themselves as Indigenous and that sort of thing. So then what you want to do is you will have, now this particular community centre was going to have 2 public servants working at it. So I came down here, and some of these models can get really big. So at the moment, they've got a big gin distillery that they're doing, it looks like, at the Sunshine Coast, and we have to run the model about 6 times to actually get the data, because it's cutting across a number of different industries. So it's cutting across food product manufacturing, it's cutting across bottling, it's also cutting across retail, food services, things like that. So depending on the project and how big it is will depend upon how often, how many times you have to run the model. And then you need to think about who is your audience as well. So I'm just throwing that out there because it does, sometimes we do get them that are really quite big. So this was 2 public servants. We're going to be working at the centre. So it was jobs, and we're looking at 2, and these were 2 additional jobs. So it wasn't 2 people moving from the other council building over to this particular building. We were creating 2 additional jobs in the community. And so then we submit that through the model. And once again, it's the same way of reading it. So we can see here, this is what our current output in the public administration sector. This is our current all industry output. This is where we need to live. Our impact on Belong Shire, 0.22, so 220,000 in terms of our indirect impact on the public admin sector. Our industrial impact, 0.09, consumption impact, 0.09. Our total impact is 400,000 on the Belong economy. Okay, then we move down here, we've got our multipliers. As I say, most of the time now they don't ask for multipliers. At one stage they were. Our total impact, 420,000 outside of the Belong Shire, 500,000 in terms of the impact on the Australian economy. Okay, so that's how you read the model. And when we come down here, we see 2 local jobs, actually ends up being total impact is 3. Okay, as we run those numbers through the economy, total impact on Queensland is 3, total impact on Australia is 3. Okay, so that's how you read the model. And then you come back down and we get our full set of information below. Okay, and you can just export that and then export it into Word and take out all the information that you don't need, any of the confusing stuff. I tell the council, be careful how much you tell the councillors sometimes, because it can get so confusing that you actually, it does become a bit tricky. So that's the economic impact model. We've also got an event impact calculator. Yep. So you can come in here. I often just do it for rodeos because every place has a rodeo that I visit in Queensland. And we can come in here and we see really easy to follow arts and heritage, sport and rec, or business. So we go sport and rec, rodeo, the significance of the event. So does anyone run or put in grants for events? No? So this, no. I'll just show you quickly. So this talks to us about the significance of the event. Is it a local event where just locals are going to be attending it from within the LGA? Is it a regional event where you're going to attract people from outside of the region? Or is it a state-based event where you're going to have people flying in? So Carnival of Flowers, you would have all sorts of people coming to the region to participate in that particular event. So if it's just a local event, that's right, mate. Let's hope not. So if we've got this rodeo, it's on 28th of August. The length of the event is 1 day, and we're going to, maybe get 3,000 people to the event, and they're going to spend $50 per person. We run that through the model, and we can submit that, and it will talk to us about what is the economic impact of that particular event.
When it comes to the daily spend, Southern Queensland Country Tourism, Peter Homan is a really good person to go to and say, for an event of this kind, what would normally be the average spend? So he's got all the data on people coming to a business conference will spend this much, somebody coming to a sporting event spends that much. not hard to work out. The business one is slightly higher. So when it comes to that, what am I guesstimating the spend is? If you don't want to guess it, Southern Queensland Country Tourism has got a lot of that data, so you get that number from Peter Homan. You could say in your grant application that the average spend for events of this kind, according to Southern Queensland Country Tourism, is $250. So that they also know that you just pluck that number out of the air. And that's the beautiful thing about these economic impact ones and the national, event impact is sometimes you look at it and you go, where the hell did that figure come from? Because sometimes the multiplier is quite crazy. This is done by the National Economics Institute, so NEA, to just say, according to NEA, the acronym that's on there, according to NEA, the effect on the Australian economy is this much. Both the Fed and the state know that you haven't just pulled that number out of the air, that is an actual validated tool that we use in this ID. So you just so you know, so sometimes the numbers, even from me, and I'm used to doing them, I'm just like, what the hell? Where did that, like, how does that have that big a flow-on effect? I don't get the multiplier behind. There's the nerds at IG do know. That's not one of them. She's just cool. But there are other nerds down in Sydney. We love them if they listen to the recording. That actually get, and all into the multipliers that's behind. We need to understand it. All we need to know is that it's valid. And you are 100% within your right to put that in there and quote that it's from my profile or from near if it's the multiplier.
With regards to the event impact, how people use it is, or how councils use it, is to verify some of their grants and funding. So if you've got an event grant that you provide to the community, people will have to use this to be able to apply for that grant. So if council has a grant and someone's applying for a grant to put on a football carnival or whatever it might be, they will use this tool to be able to say, well, this is what the economic benefit is going to be for the region. So you can start to, so the council can start to compare and say, well, if economics is what is driving their decision making around funding, then this will be the tool that they use. So often we will work with councils around what the economic benefits. So we're not thinking about the community benefit. We're thinking about pure economics and pure numbers, what it will bring to the region. Okay, so that's how a lot of councils will use this particular
we use
tool.
This one for a lot for the event impact calculator is also in the acquittal of grants.
Yes.
Like you've been given the money, you've run the event, now you're going to say, here's, why it was a good use of the money. In the acquittal process, or maybe in your reporting, quite often post-event, when we've got the real numbers, it was 3,274 people, we put that in to help them acquit their grant and report back as well. So it can be a post-event, it doesn't have to be a future event.
Yeah. And it can also be if you're running a marketing campaign or you're thinking about what is the benefit of an additional tourist to the region. So we would have used this tool when we started talking about with the council around the upgrade to the range crossing and things like that. What does an additional visitor, what could this potentially mean, not just in the construction phase of the project, but also what does this mean in terms of additional visitation? Same with when the shopping centre was expanded, we did the same thing. We used this tool to be able to see, well, what do we think might be the outcomes of those additional visitors to the region shopping in our community and staying in our community. So you can do that as well. So it's a really nice little tool.
Question. If you have, say, someone who can set the events that you run in India and you're trying to get the impact on the economy for that one, you have to run so many different reports.
If you can average out the numbers, Cass, for you, and I know which events you're talking about, for you, I would average out your numbers and punch it in, and then you can just multiply it out. Like we used the event impact calculator for a museum that said if we expand the museum, we think we will get this many more visitors. Now, we don't want to have to run a daily report 365 times, so we just picked a day and told us to multiply it by 365. Because that would make more sense. And we could do something similar for your events. So your average is 200 people at an event. You run this many a year.
You can definitely do that. When I worked at Moreton Bay Council, we we had about 50 events, and I had to run each one of them individually, only because they were so different. You know, you had Woodford Folk Festival versus Redcliffe Kite Festival versus Teddy Bear's Picnic in the Park. So we ran every council event that council funded, so that we could go back to council and say, well, your 5 million that you put into events contributes 50 million to the local economy, or whatever it might be. So, but certainly, you know, things like business events, if we held, I think we were holding 6 big business events with 500 people. Our business events that we ran, we would just times that by 6, you know what I mean? Because it's just, you know, so it was always, and it's just about, you know, we were just very conservative in our numbers as well. I'm more of a conservative, you know, statistician, I guess, than others. So we were always very conservative in those, what we considered visitation and things like that. And then thinking about, you know, we also ran quick surveys at the start of each event, like Kite Fest and things like that, because you've got, you know, you've got thousands and thousands of visitors coming through that. Just having an understanding of what was the postcode of where people were coming from helped to, you know, support the model, because when you're thinking about local, region, state, you have, that's broken down, that's postcodes, you know what I mean, that's it. So, you know, being able to say, well, they're from the local Moreton Bay region, so we consider them local, and then we consider these postcodes regional, and we consider these postcodes state. So then you could split the numbers and just say, okay, we have 20,000 visitors to that event, of which 60% are local, 30% are, you know, from region. And so you can run the model like that based on some reality of what's going on. So yeah, there's, you know, this is all about, you know, having solid guesstimates, you know, having those solid guesstimates and being able to use them to drive and support your, you know, decision-making, grants, all of that sort of thing as well, your investment time, things like that as well. So yeah. So that's kind of, is there any questions? It's probably the first thing.
Just remember, on both the green tab and the red tab, you can still do those report downloads. You can use the menu down the side, the menu down the bottom. Both of them are set out exactly the same. You'll see when you jump between councils, once you learn how to navigate them, if you all of a sudden have got stuff happening in other council areas, it's all laid out the same. So it's just a matter of navigating it the same. I know you guys have got an ad down the Lockyer Valley. You used to have a billboard down the Lockyer Valley. You do work down there too? Yeah, so you're lucky because
Lockyer have it as well.
Yeah, Ipswich West Moreton RDA have it, which means that it's Lockyer's in there if it's Lockyer that you're more interested in.
Yeah, they've got it as well. So
yeah.
Frizzy.
Yeah. So on the ID profile homepage, you'll see all the councils and the RDAs that have funded access to it, so you can always jump between most of them. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah, Tracy.
If we get information from
Contact him, and he'll probably just contact me and say, Kat, can you, and then I can come to you direct and help you out. So we have a lot of people who are either grant writers or things like that that will come to us and say, Kat, can you help me? I need information for Townsville, Mount Isa, you know, Burdekin, somewhere else. And then what I normally do is put them in touch with the people from those particular areas who will then help them run the model for them, or I can help you run the model. It's, you know, it's much for muchness. But yeah.
Because the other thing is usually whenever you're wanting some data around, you usually need a letter of support. So getting in touch with the right person from that region, they're the ones that should be giving you the letter of support as well.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I think we cover, I think now 85% of Queensland. So we're all over the place, you know. Yeah, which is good. Yeah. You can compare across regions as well, which is good.
For those that are online, I know you don't really get a chance to ask too many questions, but I hope you all got the update in the chat that there will be links to the recording sent to all of you, and also there's a couple of online only ones that we've got later in the week. So so those ones as well, we'll send you the links to that as well. So if the sound's a little bit better for when Kat gets up and points to the screen, the online only one, the sound might be a little bit better for those that are been online. But I see most of you stuck around until about the last 15 minutes.